Okay.
Okay, this is Joe Wren speaking about his life when he was a little boy. We're in Toronto on July the 12th, 1989, 138 Rosewell Avenue. All started out back in 1925 when my father went to New York, met my mother to be, who was a nurse in a hospital. They got married, and I arrived on October 7th, 1925, Brooklyn, New York. I've always had a tough time living down that because I grew up in Texas with my Texas accent. Everyone really gets a big bang out of the fact that I had to say I was born in Brooklyn. We moved to Texas when I was about 9 months old, and unfortunately my mother died when I was about 18 months old. I lived then with my father and old maid Aunt Julie, a wonderful person, until my father died just before my fourth birthday in Fort Worth, Texas, on South Adams.
And what were your parents' names?
My parents' names were Lucille Hill Wren and Joseph Goree Wren, and I am a junior because of that, though I never used it. I then went to live with my grandmother and Aunt Julie at Aunt Lucy's house, which also was on South Adams, and just down the street from Aunt Connie, but we kind of took over South Adams. I lived with them and had a wonderful time. They seemed to devote most of their waking hours to me, my education. They taught me to play bridge, if you can believe it. I'm told this, I don't really remember it. When I was 5 years old, Uncle Frank always told me that he saw me take a finesse when I was 5 years old, and he was thinking about taking me. Okay, my grandmother's name was Martha Campbell, and Aunt Julie's was Julia Lee Wren. After going down and living with Aunt Lucy, when my grandmother died when I was 7, and Aunt Julie moved to Lake Charles, and I moved in with my aunt and uncle, Aunt Billy and Uncle Frank, Frank J. Wren, and Willie Obella Lewis. And they really became my parents. They are the ones that I remember most of my growing up years. I always went down to Lake Charles to visit Aunt Julie every summer, and had a most interesting experience when I was 8 years old, because I had to change trains in Houston. And Uncle Frank put me on the train, which you wouldn't dream of doing nowadays, by myself. And when I got to Houston, the train from Fort Worth was late, so I had to go see my, I guess he'd be about my third or fourth cousin, who was also a lawyer and a good friend of Uncle Frank's, cousin Bob Campbell. But I had to find his office, and then I spent the night with him and his family, and left the next morning for Lake Charles, which everyone was pretty pleased with a little 8-year-old who was able to take care of himself that well. I had wonderful times during the summer with Aunt Julie, and she really did kind of plan her whole year around my coming down for the month. And we had she would save up she had a big, probably a pickle jar, and she would put all her nickels and pennies and dimes, because Aunt Julie was living off of the estate left by my great uncle, John A. Campbell, and we always called him Uncle John, though I never remember meeting him, and I'm not sure that I wasn't just a baby when he passed away. But Aunt Julie always saved up, and in those days, it only cost a dime to go to the movie. Ice cream cones were a nickel. Of course, those soft drinks, everything else, penny candy, that was still prevalent. And I could go to the baseball game for 15 cents. So even though she might have only saved up, 10, 15, or $20 over the whole year, it really made for a wonderful month for me and all the fun that I had. I always enjoyed playing games by myself to a certain extent. And I would play by the hour, play baseball, throwing a tennis ball up against the wall and having two teams. And as the ball came off the wall, if I caught it, it was an out. If I didn't catch it, it was a double or a single or a home run, depending on where the ball ended up. I had a lot of fun doing that. I used to play tennis with my cousin, Harwood Ponton, who lived across the street, with cousin Evelyn and Uncle Doc. I never did understand why we called him Uncle and she cousin. But she was a Wood, Evelyn Wood, and I was always told that she became part of our family through the Goree connection, rather than through either the Campbell or the Wren connection. And growing up in Fort Worth, we had a lot of, I lived on Virginia Place, which was out in Arlington Heights, and I can always remember coming out and going to school in North Highmount, first day, and I'd never played baseball. And at recess, I went out and played baseball, and the first time I was up, I got on base, and I was really proud of it. And
That's great.
North Highmount was a very good school. We were lucky in that this was in the second grade when I moved out there. I was 7. And in third grade, they tore down the old school and were building a new school. So we were going to school in little temporary huts, kind of. Each grader had a hut, and we only had to go half a day. So I always felt that this is why I really got even that much more interested in sports, was because every day we had a whole half a day from lunchtime on, play tennis or baseball or football or basketball, and we really took full advantage of that, all of us kids who were going to North Highmount. And it kind of showed itself because there were 4 schools: Arlington Heights Elementary, South Highmount, North Highmount, and De Zavala, which was the school down where a lot of Mexicans went. I guess you could say on the other side of the TP tracks. And North Highmount every year, playing grade to grade, our grade would win the baseball championship. So I feel that this whole year that we only had to go to school half a day made a big difference as far as sports went. How much difference it made as far as our education went, I'll never know, but that was the big thing. I had a cousins who lived in Dallas, Aunt Billy's,
Just leave that table.
Aunt Billy's 2 nephews, and John Chandler and Lewis Chandler, who all were almost, they certainly were closer than most first cousins are because of our proximity, but also they really bordered on being brothers because Lewis came over every summer. He wanted to be a lawyer and worked for Uncle Frank. This was from the time he was about 12 or 13 years old. He worked the whole 3 months and lived in the house with us. So I can really remember Lewis well, though John and I were closer in age, and Lewis was such a brain that John and I were much closer than Lewis. I guess John would have been, 3 years older than I am, and Lewis about 5 years older. Lewis said when he was up here at our 41st anniversary that he was, did he say he was 69? I think he did, so that would make him 5 years older. He said he was going to be 70 next year.
Right, well, I knew Lewis was older, but I thought John was like a year or 18.
I think he was about 2 or 3 years older. Because I know he went into service. He was a dive bomber pilot during the Second World War, sunk a couple of Japanese ships, and he was in the service at least 2.5 to 3 years earlier than I was. His mother and father, his mother was a very talented piano player, and she taught the piano. At one time had studied in Europe as a concert pianist, and the father, Roy Chandler, her name was Aunt Eddie. Roy Chandler had a good musical ear, was very good at making rhymes, and also had a good musical ear, and they had 2 grand pianos in this little house over in Dallas. And they would start playing, sometimes we'd be over on Sunday for lunch, and I can remember them, they would start playing, and then the one would take off and the other would take off, and it was just a really wonderful afternoon. You could just sit by the hour and listen to the 2 of them play. In school, I was never the greatest. I guess I was in the upper part most of the time, upper half. But my main objective was to just skim through so that I could eventually go on to college and get ahead in the business world, because by that time it was pretty obvious that unless you had a college education, you didn't have too much chance unless you were an entrepreneur and started your own business. We took a lot of great trips, Billy and Uncle Frank, and quite often Lewis and John would go with us. We went to Yellowstone. As a matter of fact, Deanne, soon someday to be my wife, and I both determined that we were in Yellowstone the same summer. So for all we know, we passed each other, our cars passed each other at that time. And that would have been in, what about the summer of 35? 37, is that what it was? It was 37. I didn't remember whether I was 10, 11, 12. I was 11 years old, I guess, because it was the summer of 37. And Billy and Uncle Frank just couldn't have been better to be than if they'd been my real mother and father, because I thought of them that way, because they just were wonderful. Uncle Frank was a very strong person, and it's an amazing thing, not only myself, but both Lewis and John, who would wheedle around their own parents and everything, always felt that Uncle Frank was absolutely fair, absolutely objective, and anything he said went. So that was always my ambition with my own children, which I didn't quite make, was to have them think about me the same way, because maybe it was because he wasn't our real father that he was able to command this respect from
How were you
the 3 of us.
when you did act up? How were you disciplined?
Well, it depended depended on this, how seriously I had
Well,
acted up.
I'm talking about being
I can
serious.
only remember once getting the strap,
Mm.
and that was when Warren Ferguson and Charles Royer and I, these were two of my friends from second grade on, and we went down and stole a bunch of golf balls. None of us could play golf, but we were really just kind of stealing for the thrill of stealing. And we got caught, and so Uncle Frank gave me the strap, and then Aunt Billy did a very smart thing, I felt. She made me take the golf balls. Warren's folks and Chick Royer's folks, they punished them some, but they didn't make them do this. I had to go back to all of the stores where we'd stolen the golf balls, and Aunt Billy would stand over to the side where no one could see, and I had to go up to the sporting department and say tell the man that I'd stolen the golf balls and I wanted to return them. And that really convinced me that I didn't want to do too much stealing for the rest of my life, I'll tell you. But I don't know whether this is what started Chick Royer on it, but he then, while the rest of us were turned toward baseball, basketball, tennis, things like that. Well, he did become quite a good tennis player, but he really became a golf fanatic, and when he was 16 years old, qualified for the U.S. Open.
Wow.
And was held Fort Worth 5 golf courses at that time. He held the course record on 3 of the 5. And this is the city where Ben Hogan and Byron Nelson both grew up. So this was quite an accomplishment. But he peaked at 16. He's still a fantastic golfer, 1 or 2 handicap. But he used to shoot 65, 66, 67 when he was 16 years old.
What about Aunt Jody? Do you remember them disciplining you or Wren?
No, I can never remember it. They always, Aunt Judy used to, my big thing of the day was Aunt Judy would always read me a chapter of Uncle Wiggily, the Uncle Wiggily books, and I can remember that, and they must have had 10 or 12 Uncle Wiggily books, and before I went to bed, that was what she read every night, was Uncle Wiggily. And didn't really remember that much about Gran, except what a wonderful lady she was, and how she just was always, Aunt Billy and Uncle Frank told me this, that she thought I was the smartest thing she had ever seen. And so she went over to, when they weren't going to take me in kindergarten, because I was born on October 7th, and so I would have had to be 4 years old. Going to be 5 in October, and she went over and convinced the principal to let me in, which always made me, from there on, the youngest person in my class, all the way through high school. I was always the youngest person. And but fortunately, I was big, grew early, and had my full height before I was 13 years old. So I could handle the fact of being the youngest a lot better than a smaller kid would who looked even younger than he really was. That always made it tough.
Did you mention your very earliest memory of anything?
Well, probably the earliest memory I have of anything was when my father, and this is really one of the 2 times I remember anything about my father, was when my father and I went to Chicago to visit Aunt Mady. And this was my mother's sister. And I can remember they had rented us I guess we stayed there for 2 weeks. And Aunt Mady and one of her sisters, I'm not sure it wasn't Aunt Alice, were living together. I think it was because they later on, remember,
We're living down the same
they
Peter
got
Street.
mad and
Right.
didn't speak to each other.
But they were living in
for
St.
20
Petersburg
years.
together for
But they were
20
living
years.
together
Yeah.
in Chicago. And we had an apartment, small little bachelor apartment that my father and I stayed in. And there was a courtyard between our two apartments. And I can remember one time going across that courtyard. My father wasn't there, so I was going over to try and find Aunt Nadie. Obviously, I didn't think much of Aunt Alice because I don't remember Aunt Alice at all. I just remember Aunt Nadie. I can remember my father coming around the corner with a paper in his hand, just really bustling along because he saw me kind of wandering across. I guess I was 2.5, 3 years old. I was probably 2.5 years old. And then the other thing I remember is the night my father died. I really remember more the night.
Sure.
Being taken across the street, and they read me stories. I was 4, I guess, at the time.
Did you know that he was ill?
I knew he was ill, and then Aunt Julie or Aunt Connie came rushing across the street and got me and took me in because he wanted to see me, and I think he died within
Well,
an
tell me,
hour after that.
was he, had he been like bedridden for any period of time, or did he?
I
like,
think he'd been
more like
bedridden
you?
for a week or 2, but I don't remember going into his.
You don't remember him being stay out of bed or anything?
Yeah, I do. Well, just that there at the end,
Yeah.
but I think it had gotten into his lungs, and he had emphysema and so forth. And when he died of heart, they
His
say
heart.
a heart.
Well, isn't that why?
But it wasn't a heart attack.
No,
It was
it's
just
probably
a
congestive
general
heart.
deterioration and
Congestive heart
debilitation.
attack.
Yeah.
Isn't that what Wren says in that thing, why they came back to Texas at all, was because his heart was already starting to fail. When you were 18 months old, he was having trouble.
And but I thought also, well, no, this was when I think we came back when I was 9 months old.
Well,
But
okay.
we lived there for some time
But they say
before
'cause it
my
was bad
mother.
heart.
But somewhere
That's what
along the
she
line,
says in that
we
story.
went by Lake Charles because they talk about Cousin Evelyn and Uncle Doc talked about my mother when we were there for some period of time, maybe months, 2 months, 3 months, or something like that. What a lovely person she was, and so forth.
So this was sometime after she died, but before?
No,
Because they met her.
Yeah, they met her and knew her.
Of course, she may have stopped to see her family in Alabama as well, go back, then go back to Louisiana.
As I say, I never quite, as I told you, I never quite knew why Aunt Connie and Aunt Julie owned a house across the street from the pond. Aunt Julie owned the lower floor, and Aunt Connie owned the upper floor. And Aunt Julie rented the bottom floor except for one room. And she had a hot plate and everything. She used to make the most wonderful meals on that.
Hot
That
plate in
hot
the
plate.
closet,
She'd
that
make
is.
chicken polo
Right.
and Brunswick stew and all of these great things that I just love. And of course, we'd go crabbing, and then we'd go over to the ponds, which they had a big house. And
This is when you guys know Elwood?
yeah, and Elwood was very good to me. She started me on stamp collections, and Elwood was always a little slow. And so though she was considerably older, I guess
Yeah.
Harwood was maybe 2 or 3 years older, and Elwood would have been 7, 8, 9 years older. I felt like she was on the same intellectual level that I was. And I think she felt, we could talk to each other as, at that age, usually someone that's 8 or 9 years old and someone that's 16 or 17 or 18 years old, they don't have much in common.
No.
But I felt like Elwood was in my equal peer group type of deal, and we would do things together, and she would play games with me, go fishing and concentration, and I'd pass that a little bit, but anagrams, which I was never very good at. which, and
Well,
then
she
later
said-
on, I found out I wasn't very good at Scrabble either, so.
See, maybe she just liked Wednesday with the kids. Tell me something, was she still living, is that still the same house when I went to see her that
Yes.
time?
I thought she had moved across the street and was living with,
Yeah, no, she
with,
lived by herself when I saw her.
well, then that was still the same house.
No,
So
I
I
think it
could
was
have
kind of
sworn
run
that
down.
the,
I
what
know
was the
it's
name,
been an older house,
Bledsoe?
I was pretty shocked.
Bledsoe or something. What, why, was it about falling down?
Yeah, oh, yeah. And you know, everything looked so antiquated. I remember I came and told you, I thought we should give her, buy her at least a new stove or something. I don't even
Well,
know if it
Harwood
worked.
was pretty successful, so
Yeah,
I figured.
he probably was, and to me, to see, you know, I'd never seen the walls that needed paint and things like
Yeah.
that. It was in screens all pushed out and stuff. It was just kind of a shock to me. Probably wouldn't be as bad now.
I wonder, yeah, some of the places you lived in North Carolina, that apartment, you know, that apartment that had the blacks. Anyhow, getting back to kind of the story through grade school, I just had kind of a normal, average, I think, Texas American
How did
grade
you
school.
celebrate the holiday?
Well, 4th of July, we always had fireworks, and I can always remember that we would take cherry bombs and and John and Louis would always come over, and their parents, and little Annie.
And
And Carolyn had married very early, married Jean, and she lived in the littlest house I think I've ever seen. It was right by North High, and I remember this brings back a thought of things that for some reason the fights that we had at school were always off the school ground, but kind of not in her backyard, but in the alley kind of behind her house. And she told Aunt Billy one day, she said, "I know Joe's going to be in a fight before long because he's always out there promoting." And so we were going to graduate from 6th grade, and the night before, this other guy and I, Jerry James was his name, got in this fight, and he gave me a great big fat lip. And so at the graduation, I've got this great big fat lip and everything, but because I think his head had hit mine.
No.
I don't think it was his fist. I think somehow his head had come in contact. But when I was delivering the Fort Worth Press, her house was the last house on my route, and I would always ride my bike down there and leave it there, and then walk across the school grounds, pick up my papers, and then work my way around West 7th and West 6th and West 5th and back then, and then back down to her house and then pick up my bike and ride home. And so I'd always, practically every day, I would see Carolyn. And that's the reason Carol Jean, I know her so well, because I saw her from the time she was born. Just a little
So she
toddler.
was born when you were
Yeah. when
in
we
grade
were-
school then?
Yeah, and no, I wasn't, I was now in junior high school,
Is that
but
what
I would
time
ride
it
my
was?
bike over, that would be Stripling.
Oh, nice.
And that's where I first started playing football and basketball, was at Stripling. And I was big in the ROTC there, on a picture of me there when I was the officer in the ROTC. And that's when I started going to summer camp instead of going down to see Aunt Julie. Can't remember the last year I went down there, but it would have been somewhere in that 11
Well, when did she
year
die?
old. But she didn't die till after we were married,
Oh, that's right.
because she came up to the wedding. That was really the last trip that she took, and then she died that
that's what you
that fall, because I remember we were in Chicago. Remember we had gone out with the Outlaws that night, and then you spent the night with the Outlaws.
We were in Columbia 2 more years before we went to
Oh, that's
Chicago.
right, that's right. So, I mean, it was 1950 she died, the year I graduated, we got married. So it was 1950, the
Did you
fall.
all go all the way to Texas for the funeral?
I did, I flew down to Lake Charles, the funeral was in Lake Charles. Well, I was on planes in the Second World War.
Well, I guess that I didn't know they had commercial planes.
And
That anyone could just hop on, you know, when they were students and all that stuff.
and so, and I went down and visited her one summer.
Oh, did you?
Yeah. And I always liked Lake Charles. It was a great, it's kind of like Windy and Meaford. And it was a small town. When I was there, I guess it was probably maybe 15,000, 20,000 at the outside people. You could drive your bike around and had to wait and everything. One time when John and I, he was telling a story, John went down with me one summer and an alligator came in the lake and they called us in and they didn't want to say hurry in because they were afraid if we started thrashing around, the alligator would speed up. And then they shot the alligator. And then it would be crabbing sometime. The alligators would come up and grab the way you crab. You have a big piece of beef, chunk of beef, and you have it on the end of a string and a net. The crab gets on there and you pull the other slow and then scoop the net under.
Yeah, we do that in North Carolina.
Do you? You still do it?
Uh-huh. We
And
do it with the kids.
you make
We never
crab
catch-
gumbo.
Well, we never catch very good ones.
You don't, well,
There aren't
see,
any
you're
left.
getting really kind of sand crabs, where we were getting bayou crabs. You know,
We do it on the
they were that
south
big
side.
around.
Yeah, we
the
go on the
bodies.
south side, right.
And even the claws were big enough to get some.
I always thought it was because they were just crabbed out. There were just too many people to support these areas. And so we, in fact, we throw them back if they're too little.
Well, it could be, but I think they're more of the.
These are on the sound side. They're not out in the ocean, right?
No.
So that they're,
but,
you know, yeah, I don't know.
But
They're the
these
same or not, but
were
they're
all up
good.
at
We
the
do cook
bayous
them.
there.
Yeah, we do cook them. They are good. And you don't think that possibly the reason that they have it Lake Charles, it must be near where, you know, they spent, Martha, your grandmother spent
All I
7
know,
years.
all I know is that it's Calcasieu County.
Mhm.
And they
No, I'm
said
just saying
something
that they
about,
spent- Well, she says DeSoto Parish. That doesn't mean
or
necessarily.
Calcasieu Parish, that's right, they don't call them counties.
Oh,
And,
so that was it.
it's what we call a county, they call a parish.
I don't remember where it is, but it is on the road to Galveston because I know that, you know, I mean, it's in the same area because they spent 7 years there and she even
Well,
says
probably
that.
Galveston's in Texas.
No, but when they were on their way from Alabama to Texas,
But,
that they stopped 7 years in this DeSoto Parish, which is why Wren was born there and a couple of the other kids were born there. And it says they always had friends they went back and visited where they spent those 7 years. Because, you know, that was the, what is that?
Book.
Well, that,
Book.
you know, like I say, that's the thing. Okay, and so you don't truly remember Gran all that much.
No, I really don't, I just,
I didn't realize that, but you remember Aunt Julie naturally because you spent all those extra years with her. Do you
Yeah.
remember stories that Aunt Julie might have told you about her?
about Grant.
Yeah, or Uncle Frank?
Other than just what a wonderful, and in fact, Aunt Billy talked about her more than anybody. Aunt Billy thought she was the most wonderful person. I think she even thought she was more wonderful than her own mother. You know,
Did she spend a lot of time with them? I know
She
they
only
lived
had
here.
Well, they-
second grade
Yeah,
education,
she
and yet
had,
she was so brilliant and
wrote
knew
so
so much.
well,
And she had a boarding house, was that right?
and a boarding house in Galveston at one time.
And what, was that related to Clark's? You said the Campbells lived there with her, but that, they didn't.
Well, the only reason I know that the Clark Campbell, grandpa, as Uncle Frank called him, was that they said when that portrait was taken, it was faded, and Uncle Frank, the glint in his eyes, because Uncle Frank was running around his chair all the time and pulling at his pants and that sort of thing. And that's why the whole family wanted Uncle Frank to have the picture.
You can't turn the light on, can you, because we took the extension cord. Here it is, will you turn
The
it
painting
on?
of Grandpa.
And what was his name?
Clark Calhoun Campbell, Clark C. Campbell. He was a doctor in the Civil War, and we always claimed that, he had, how many brothers did he have, Jody?
I have it written there,
8 brothers or something like that?
there were about 9 of them. They had 12 and 9 of them grew to adulthood is what Carolyn